Welcome to the Sermon in the Valley with Pastor Rob Eller. You can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast on any of those platforms and share it with your friends and family. Thank you. And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." Welcome back to the Sermon in the Valley. Pastor Rob Eller here. Now, you may be wondering why I'm using that particular verse again, because usually when I do, it deals with the homeless shelter. Well, today's episode is a little different. And different in a very, very good way. The shelter finally has a plan. It finally has all come together. They have a plan to build a new facility. As I've been talking about all year, and this saga has been going on even beyond from me starting this podcast. The saga has been going on for at least 2 years. A recap of all that. For the last couple of years, the Friends of the Homeless of Tuscarawas County have been looking for property to build a new shelter. Their current building is around 100 years old. It is falling apart inside. It needs a lot of work done to it. The boiler system is so outdated they can't find parts anymore. It is not handicap accessible. And they've had to shut down an entire floor due to issues with mold and bed bugs. And the bed bug issue, while not directly caused by the deterioration of the building, being able to get rid of the problem is a result of the deterioration of the building. With that, it's because one way you can get rid of bed bugs is through extreme heat. But the amount of power needed to run those heaters to get rid of the bed bugs blows the breakers throughout the entire building. So the bed bug issue is an indirect result of the deterioration of the building and its current state. So they've been searching for property. They've had probably around a half dozen different sites they've looked at, they've tried to purchase, and each step of the way, neighbors have got up and said, "No, we don't want this in our neighborhood," which I take deep issue with. And then also, the city has come along and said, "Well, you're zoned, this property is zoned residential, or this property is zoned commercial, you can't build on it." And each time the shelter would say, "Well, we are a residential facility," or "We are a nonprofit," both of which cover under zoned business or zoned residential, but it didn't work. And this has gone on and on and on, and things were silent for about 6 months. They decided to regroup and figure out what can they do next. Well, they have a plan. So between the shelter and the Presbyterian church next door to it, which the shelter is an offshoot of the church. The current pastor there is the president of the board. It was a ministry offshoot from the church. The two have collaborated, and the Presbyterian church has turned over the land for the shelter, because presently, until that point, the church owned the land in the building. The church turned over the land in the building, along with some other lots around it, to the shelter. So the shelter effectively has about half of that quarter block. And they're going to use that property to build a brand new building. They're going to tear down their current halfway house rehab facility that they have. They also run a drug rehab facility. They're going to tear down that existing building and convert the current shelter into the new halfway house. They're going to raise the money to be able to convert that as best they can to the halfway house, and then also put some office space in there as well. Now you might be thinking, well, why didn't they just renovate the current building? Well, it's not exactly handicap accessible, and they can't really make it handicap accessible. Because of the age of the building, there are limitations to it. You can't just tack on an elevator and call it a day. And to do that would cost a lot of money. It's better to design a building from the ground up to be handicap accessible than to make an existing one handicap accessible. But they have the plan. It's moving forward. They presented it to the city. The city gave their thumbs up on the preliminary plan, and we will see what happens next. They're going to have their architect draw up what the building will look like. It'll most likely not be the one-story facility they've been hoping for. It'll probably end up being a two-story facility just because of constraints of the plots of land they have. And as well, because it's multiple plots of land, they have to go through the process of combining all of those into one plot for permit purposes for construction. But it's moving forward. It's going to still take some time. This building's not going to go up overnight. It'll take a significant chunk of 2024 for this to happen. They need to raise the money for it, but it won't be as much money now because they don't need to worry about buying the property since they now already own the property. But this is all good news. This is all wonderful. I had said in my last episode about the shelter that the whole idea of no news is good news was false in this case. Well, I was wrong. I will admit I was wrong, because the no news meant that there was a lot of behind the scenes work happening that wasn't public yet. But it has been made public finally, and I can finally talk about this. It doesn't mean I'm not going to stop advocating for the shelter. I am still in the process of joining the shelter board, and I hope to use that position to be able to continue to advocate on behalf of the shelter and on behalf of those who are homeless in our area. I have said it many times. Most, if not all of us, at some point in our lives, have been one paycheck away from being homeless. I know I have. Early in my adult life, when I first struck out on my own, there were months where we were scraping by, where we were drawing down on savings, where we were cutting certain things out, where we were going with cheaper options for things, because that's what we could afford, because we needed to keep the roof over our head. And many of us, we are in a position now where we don't have that savings to back up on. That if we were to suddenly lose our jobs, or we get hit with some big financial burden, we could end up being homeless. We need to have empathy for those folks. They're not all, and in fact, actually, they're not criminals. They're not drug addicts. Some might be. Some might have a criminal record. Some might be recovering addicts. But we still shouldn't demonize them for that. Because they're people just like us. They're created in the image of God just like us. They're loved by God just like us. If God still loves them, then why shouldn't we? If God accepts them, then why shouldn't we? I'm tired of the dehumanization of those who are homeless. It needs to stop. It needs to stop. I've said this in a prior episode, and maybe even more than once. Though I volunteered at a homeless shelter. It was an overflow shelter housed in my church, the one I went to before I became a pastor. And those people, yes, there were some issues. Yes, that happens. That happens. But the vast majority of them, they were grateful that we were putting a roof over their head. They were grateful that we were giving them a hot meal at dinner time. They're grateful for the showers that we offer for them. the laundry services. And the one that sticks out to me the most, and I've said this story many times, but it bears repeating. I was volunteering one night. I had just applied to seminary. I had just visited the seminary. And one of those, swag gifts they give you to try to convince you to go was a very, very simple messenger style bag. And I had brought it with me because I brought my laptop so I could do some stuff, keep myself occupied because I was going to be there from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. So to keep myself awake, I needed something to do. And so I had that bag with me, and one of the gentlemen walking in saw the bag and liked it, and he said, "Hey, if you ever see those bags again somewhere, can you let me know? I would like one of those." And I thought, well, it's a free bag from a seminary. I don't know how you're going to find one, but I was like, well, I'll do you one. And I thought to myself, I'll do one better. So that night, I sent an email off to the admissions director at the time at the seminary. A person who's become a dear friend and colleague of mine who's now a pastor in my synod. And I said, "Hey, Seth, that messenger bag you gave me when I came to visit, can you mail me a couple more? I'm at a shelter right now, volunteering, and a gentleman here really liked it, and I want to be able to give him one the next time I see him." 2 days later in the mail, they arrive. I had no actually asked for one, they sent me 2, but that doesn't matter. So I packed the one up, and I'm volunteering a few days later, and I'm sitting down there at the check-in desk waiting for the guy to walk through. And I see him coming, and I was like, "Hey, sir, do you have a minute? I got something for you." And I pull out of my bag this bag. And this guy, he's probably he's at least as tall as me. I'm 6'2", but he's at least as tall as me. Big muscular guy. He sees it. I can see tears starting to come in his eyes. And I hand it to him. He gives me this great big bear hug and shakes my hand. And through his tears, he says, "This is how brothers treat each other." That moment really opened my eyes to being more empathetic to those who are homeless, to being more empathetic to those who need help. I still at that point I wanted to help them, but even more so after that, because it was a really humanizing moment. It's like, hey, this one small gesture made such a huge difference in that man's life. And that was, oh shoot, that would have been 7 years ago now? Yeah, that would have been 7 years ago. I hope that gentleman still has that bag. I hope he's still using it, because that moment was really special. So wherever he is, I don't even know his name. He probably doesn't even know I'm even mentioning him in this podcast. But wherever he is, I hope he still has that bag. Because that just, wow. I'm even tearing up now thinking about it, because that was such a moving moment. We need to do everything we can to help those in need. Doesn't matter, the homeless, the people who don't have enough food on the table, the people who just need a hand to get by. That's how we were supposed to be. That's what Jesus told us. In the Bible, Jesus said, you always have the poor with you. We need to help them. We need to help them as much as we can. Well, that's all I got for you today. Thank you for tuning in once again. Wonderful news about the shelter. I am over the moon. I can't wait to see what happens next. If you like what you hear, make sure you share this podcast. Share it with just one person. And then ask that person to share it with one person. And maybe we can get this audience growing bigger and bigger. And the good news of the gospel can spread further and further and further. The Sermon in the Valley is written and produced at the Patrick Stevens Broadcast Studio here in the heart of the Tuscarawas Valley in Ohio. God's peace be with each and every single one of you. Have a blessed day.